When we're looking back at what we went through, what can we do differently this time? What choices can I make now that are informed? What things can I flip the switch on and do a 180 and do something completely different than what I did last time? Because that is how you're going to set yourself up for the highest chance of a different outcome, is by not taking the same approach that led to that difficult birth experience.
Welcome to the Birth Education Center podcast, hosted by myself, Care Messer, an entrepreneur, birth educator, and doula. My team and I want to help you discover your options in birth and postpartum, how to find your voice, and how to use that voice to navigate our maternal healthcare system. You and your baby are not just a number. This information includes doulas too. Now let's get started. So we're coming back to another VBAC episode. We want to go over kind of the work that we do with our families to get them prepared for a VBAC. When we have a VBAC class, should I just dive in, Ashley?
Yeah, go for it. I think that we're really getting down to the nitty-gritty today of what you really need to do to have your VBAC or any birth experience that you want to have.
Actually, any birth, but a lot of us don't prepare this deeply for birth. So what we found with our moms that come in with wanting a VBAC is there's a lot of trauma sometimes, or unwanted outcomes, or negative support, or whatever it is. And everyone has their unique story, right? Some people are like, no, I opted because my baby was breech, or I didn't want to, but this, or I actually wanted one and then didn't realize what I got myself into. I don't want to do that this time, right? Everybody has a different story. So as we're sorting through stories, that allows us as the facilitators to hear the class above the class and understand what parts they actually needed help with that they may not be recognizing just because we've done it for so long. So as we're sorting out stories, I want you to take yourself to a very vulnerable place and actually tell your story, whether you're writing it down or you're telling it to a doula or some other person, somebody that can actually listen to you without, what about this and what about that? Just listen to, as you're telling it, what's coming out. Sometimes if you're telling a doula or your partner the story, and you've probably repeated it a lot over the last year or two, but you're telling it to somebody who's been in the room, they have their own story about what happened, right? That's not going to be from the point of view that you had it. And I also need you to go back to telling your story about what are the parts that you wanted to change that you wish you had done before that birth happened. Did you not get education? Did you not take it seriously when you heard your provider say this? Were you listening to fear-mongering stories from other family and friends? Of course you went with the induction. Whatever it is, where are the parts that you can take ownership and responsibility for? And I will also say there could be a story where there is no ownership. It was rushed, it was this, and that's what happened, and it was out of the blue. But the important part of getting honest with yourself is we can't make changes until your vulnerability is showing. And I know a lot of time that we just in our lives in general, because of past experiences that we've had or past trauma that we've had, we have a certain way of looking at things and we can't look outside that box. I'm asking you to look outside that box if you need to. One of the most important pieces of changing your story is allowing yourself to be vulnerable and safe with those around you, which is the kind of support that you need to gather. And also being as strong in your why of why you want this, that it doesn't matter what anybody else thinks. It doesn't matter what anyone else says. It doesn't matter if they're supportive or not, because you are your best support at the end of the day. And if you aren't allowing yourself to be vulnerable in the things that make you weak, you're not going to be able to be strong in the things that make you strong. So that's the point of when we start talking about stories and asking questions, we're trying to get to those vulnerable points of where you felt your weakest and where you want to improve your strength, or highlighting the places that you were strong so that we can make those expansive this time.
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely speak to the looking back, that retrospective that you take when you've gone through a traumatic birth experience. And I didn't go on to pursue a VBAC or have other children because having three at one time is a lot. But I had a lot of stories I told myself about why things happened the way that they did and the roles other people played in them. And at the end of the day, why I ultimately had an emergency cesarean delivery was an accident, and it was nobody's fault that things happened the way that they did. However, I do have to take some responsibility in that I definitely made choices along the way that ultimately did not set me up for success or set me up to make really informed decisions. And it started way back when I first found out I was having triplets, where I made a pretty conscious decision that I was not going to take any birth classes because I wasn't going to fit in, because people were going to look at me like I was crazy for wanting a vaginal delivery. I let my anxiety about how I would be perceived in a birthing class, in sort of a traditional birthing class, or how I would be perceived by anybody that I was sharing my hopes of having a vaginal delivery, allowed me to separate myself from education that could have potentially led me to make different choices in my birth experience. And I think that it's really important to know that you're not to blame, especially for not knowing what you didn't know before you learned it. There's so much about birth and the physiology of birth and interventions and the psychology of birth and all of these things that I only learned after the fact, after I had my birth, because I was healing from my birth and I sought out these resources and I ultimately became a doula. And there's so much that I didn't know. But I know that even the person I was when I went through my pregnancy and had my babies toyed with the idea of taking classes. And then I ultimately didn't. And I toyed with the idea of hiring a doula and I ultimately didn't. And so I did rob myself of a lot of information, education, and support that ultimately I let anxiety win, social anxiety win, simply about how I would be perceived or how I would be treated or how I would be looked at, keep me from pursuing education and information that ultimately could have led to a better birth experience. And so when we talk about taking responsibility, we're not saying that you need to blame yourself or shame yourself for your birth outcomes. But I think it's really important when we tell our stories and we explore our stories that we are not centering ourselves always as the victim of our stories, because there are a lot of things that we go through that we are a participant in the way things unfold. And birth is one of those things where, yeah, we're facing this big system and a lot of things happen to us that are out of our control or that are manipulative. There is a lot of abuse that happens within the medical system, but there's also a lot of opportunities leading into our birth experiences for support and education that a lot of times we will opt out of or avoid for a variety of reasons. And if we can say the next time around, when we're looking back at what we went through, what can we do differently this time? What choices can I make now that are informed? What things can I flip the switch on and do a 180 and do something completely different than what I did last time? Because that is how you're going to set yourself up for the highest chance of a different outcome, is by not taking the same approach that led to that difficult birth experience.
And I think sometimes we're looking for a guarantee. If I take a birth class, if I hire a doula, does that guarantee me the outcome I want? No, it doesn't, because there are no guarantees in life, right? Everything is a risk. However, you mitigate the risk by hiring the right support, by facing your fears, by setting yourself up with education and understanding of the process, not only of your body and your baby, but of the system. How do I navigate that system? Not only that, how do I navigate my voice, because my voice matters? And we have been conditioned to stay quiet, to stay small, and to not say what we're actually feeling, even if it's I'm just scared. I don't have enough information. What you're saying is scaring me. Please explain that to me in a better way. Like, why can't we say that? Why don't we say that? Because we've been conditioned to keep our mouth shut and be good little girls. And this is the time for the 180. This is your time to sort this shit out and do the work that is not always easy, and really figure out how you can become more grounded, stronger, and have more empathy and compassion for yourself, as well as the experience you're about to have, You don't have to know it all. You don't have to do it all, but you need to figure out those pieces that didn't work for you last time, that may be a vulnerable step for you to take because it's uncomfortable. Do you remember Jenny's episode where she said, it's not that you can't do it, it's that it's unfamiliar. You haven't done that yet. So we're going to talk a little bit about that too. Ashley, that makes sense what you just said about you're not crazy if you want this. You talked about that in the last episode. You're not crazy if you don't want this. And you've had this passion thing about it. And I'm like, oh, because you were so afraid that people
Yeah.
were going to judge you and shame you and call you crazy for wanting a vaginal birth with triplets.
Yeah.
So
And
yeah,
it's the same way that people look at you when you say maybe you want a VBAC, right? Because the standard has become that you just show up for your next scheduled cesarean. I think that we're starting to come around to really recognizing birth trauma, and that you can have yourself physically alive and your baby physically alive and be grateful that you're both here and safe, or in my case, that all four of us were here and safe, and also still grieve the loss of the birth that you thought you were going to have, be traumatized by how you were treated or how things unfolded, and be scared of the prospect of going through it again, of things repeating themselves, have hard feelings towards the people that supported you. And that's where I think that it is important. And it was important for me when I looked back at my birth experience to look at where I was responsible. And at the end of the day, it was a group of people coming together to get these three babies here safely, that we were all doing the best we could with what we had at our disposal. And I think that if we can let go of the hard feelings that we have towards the people that were a part of our first birth, whether that's if our partner didn't show up in the way that we needed them to, if we didn't have a supportive care provider, ourselves, but taking responsibility for your role in your difficult birth experiences doesn't mean blaming yourself. As I mentioned before, you also need to be willing to forgive yourself and give yourself grace again for not knowing what you didn't know, and knowing that you're going to really make an effort to do things differently this time around. And so I have so much love and compassion for people who are trying to birth outside of is considered like the societal norms. And I think that's why I got so passionate at the end of the last episode, is because I know what people who want VBACs face talking to their families, looking on the internet, when they're looking for birth classes, when they're looking for providers, of people looking at them like they're crazy because they don't want another surgical birth, or they hopefully can have a vaginal birth and that might be healing for them, and maybe that's safer for them, and maybe that's safer for their baby, and that's not crazy. But it starts with looking back at that first birth experience and saying, what am I going to change this time? What am I responsible for? What am I forgiving myself for? And what am I responsible for letting go, so that I can move forward lighter into this birth experience? And you're right. You can't just check boxes and buy the right things to make you have the right birth experience, or hire X, Y, and Z people, professionals that are going to magically make me have a good birth experience. Because at the end of the day, it comes back to us, and it's about ourselves and getting our heart, our minds, and our bodies on the same page.
energetically, it's about acceptance to what is, to what's happening. So we need to release and figure out first, and we're going to go to fears. What were the fears you had going into that last birth? What didn't you get help with those fears? Was it the provider? Was it surgery? That was the one thing you didn't want, and everything led to it. So now you're thinking, what's going to work this time? Because I prepared completely last time and I still got the one thing I didn't want. What other fears did you bring in? Were they your neighbors? Were they your cousins? Were they your moms? Were you a cesarean? And so your inherent belief is that my mom's body couldn't do it, neither could mine do it. Do you have a history of cesareans in your family? We have families that come up from Brazil all the time. They're third and fourth generation cesareans, yet they want a vaginal birth. Sometimes they have one and sometimes they don't. And they're like, see, it's genetic. Surgery is not genetic. That's a surgery. Just because your mom had an arm surgery doesn't mean everybody in the family is going to have a surgery, but there's a belief tied to it when it's a cesarean, right? What fears did you have going in last time? What are the new fears that are coming up? That it's not going to work, that your partner's going to be the exact same, that your doula is going to fall asleep again? Like, what are those fears? That your provider's not going to show up, that they said they would be there, but they won't? Like, really looking at the general group of fears, not being scared by them, but naming them, because we can't help you through fear until they're named. So one of the things that we do in hypnobirthing is we have an emotion fear release sheet that we have them fill out throughout the course so that we can talk about them and come up with backup plans. Ignoring fears just makes them bigger. I don't think fears are bad. I think fears show us where we need more education, more support. I want to know what is driving my internal message so that I can be on the lookout for it, because the fear doesn't run everything unless you let it. So we really delve into fears. What are the new ones coming up is really important.
Yeah, it's something that I talk a lot about when I'm explaining why we do fear work in hypnobirthing, is that it's a very Western idea to think that you can ignore anything and that it'll go away. But in particular fears, uncomfortable conversations, anything that makes us feel a little bit like, oh, we want to pretend like we can ignore it and it'll go away. And that's just how we deal with things. That's how many of us are raised to deal with things. We don't confront things, we don't talk about things, and especially things that you're scared of. You're okay, you're okay, okay, you're fine, you're fine, you're fine. Just ignore it, it'll go away. And many of us come up that way. And most of us, as we get into the age of having children, most of us have never been exposed to the idea that fears and feelings and thoughts in our heads physically impact how our body functions and how our body needs to function in labor, and how it's so closely tied to our emotions and our mind and our heart, and how we can literally change how we experience our labor by the fears that are bouncing around in our head and how they manifest in our body. And it's well understood in psychology. It's well understood in birth work that fear will contribute to pain or cause pain, and we need to address it head on in order to keep it from becoming a roadblock in our birth experience. And there's a quote recently that I shared and I've been sharing with people that I think is especially powerful for people pursuing VBAC. And that is that the thing about bravery is when you're doing it right, it feels a lot like fear. It's so good. It's something that I always want to hold on to, is that it's okay to feel scared, right? But the moving forward and the moving through it and the working with it, that's the bravery, right? Releasing fears and working on your fears and facing your fears is not saying you're not scared anymore. You're great. You're not afraid. Because as Care talks about in so many of our episodes, fear is actually an important thing to keep us safe, right? Having fear as a member of our team is part of being a real functional human being who is actually capable of achieving things, right? But not allowing it to dictate how you experience the world, or keeping you from moving forward, or keeping you from your goals, and allowing it to hold you back and paralyze you. And when we refuse to acknowledge the things that we're afraid of, and we refuse to let them out, to put them down on paper, to say them out loud, to speak them out of our mind, that's when we're allowing them to control our lives and our experiences and our births and everything. Keep that in mind, right? Fear can be something that you utilize as a superpower to help cultivate a positive experience, or it can be the thing that holds you back. And if you're going to try to ignore it, it's going to get bigger, and it's going to be the thing. It's going to be the roadblock that comes up and gets in your way.
And those kinds of fears they keep you inhaling the whole time, right? They keep you tight, scared, instead of, I got this. Everything's going to be okay. I'm making it through. I have support around me, right? That feeling of safety for a mammal is essential for labor, birth, and parenting. And if we walk around, and I am the queen of survival, I know it like the back of my hand, because I am in a constant work in progress with my body to, okay, you're safe right now. Believe it. And I'm going to talk about books next, but this just came to me. I am reading a book right now called The Presence Process, that's kicking my ass. But his definition of presence has been so good, and I've been keeping it with me the last couple of weeks, and it's worked so well for me. His definition of being present is staying in the experience and experiencing the experience without wanting anything to change, just allowing the story to be there. And not saying that you don't want it to shift, but in that moment, the anxiety is tenfold if you're resisting what's happening. And not saying that every trauma, of course, we're going to resist things that hurt or whatever, but allowing it to be the story instead of everything's not going my way and there's this and that, and immediately jumping towards reaction instead of response. Because the response is a very controlled, understanding, allowing acceptance process, where the reaction is absolute rebuttal and a resistance that's going to cause more harm to ourselves and our psyches than if we're allowing the process, understanding it, and then finding a response to it. That's the controlled thing we all want, but we don't practice it. And I have been practicing the last couple of weeks and it has kicked my ass, but in a really good, solid way. And I'm like, what would it be like if I actually lived like this all the time? I think I'd be peaceful like a Buddha. I don't know if I could be this way all the time, but I'm willing to try. And there are a couple books that we have recommended in the past for families to read. If you're watching this, you can see it. Me hold it up. One is When Things Fall Apart by Pema Chodron. Heartfelt advice for difficult times. It can change your whole life. It shifts perceptions, perspectives. It allows you to look deeply into your soul and where you've come from, where you're going. I've used it with grief when my dad died. It's a beautiful book to open yourself up. And I will tell you this, if you're doing all this stuff while you're pregnant, you're going to cry a lot. A lot, because it's deep work to do. I would much rather you be doing it before you're pregnant, but that's usually when you find stuff like this, right? Podcasts and stuff. If you are doing this kind of work while you're pregnant, and the grief and the waves of anxiety and emotion are going to come up, please talk to your baby that's inside your body and just say, hey, I'm going to do some stuff right now. Has nothing to do with you, but it's going to help us with our birth process. So as you're feeling things, know that it's stuff that mom's going through that I need to work through, has nothing to do with you. We actually even have a meditation called the golden bubble of protection. If you want to do that meditation and kind of put a golden bubble of protection around your baby so that only love and soft energy goes to them, it's a really good visualization to help you work through stuff. Another book that we recommend is Labor Like a Goddess. It is a simple yet deeply profound book. It's not that thick. You can see, not that thick, but she really walks you through gates of transformation, like the oldest time kind of information that we've had centuries ago, where we didn't have all this modern technology that tells us we can't do things and that we need to be quiet. This book really, especially for second time moms, I have my first time moms read it, but especially for second timers, whether they're going for a VBAC or not, it helps them open up like, oh my gosh, this was a piece I was missing last time. Or, oh, I didn't even think about pain like this. Oh, I really need to understand where I'm coming from with that. It has pieces in it that really shift and work to open up parts of you that have not wanted to be vulnerable, that have that resistance to hide because you're strong and you run everything and you don't want to let people think you're weak. When the truth is, we all have weak moments and weak parts, and that's okay. And that's when we kind of rely on other people to help buoy us up. But definitely Labor Like a Goddess. And if you really want to go deep and work on stuff from childhood forward, How to Do the Work by Nicole LaPera. She's a holistic psychologist. If you find her on Instagram and TikTok, oh my gosh, there's stuff in there that will shift everything for you. She's very matter of fact. And the stuff in her book and in her therapies and in her meditations and the courses that she runs really get into what happened those first 7 years of your life, where those beliefs came from, and how we have carried them through because of how we were parented, where we went to school, what our siblings were like, all that kind of stuff, right? Some of it's not traumatic. Some of it we had a really good childhood, all of that. But our beliefs from then obviously influence how we handled our pregnancy, how we handled our birth, how we handled who we picked for a partner, all of that. And it really starts to open things up. So if you're ready to dive in, it's a big book and it's very deep, but it's an amazing way to start.
I mean, all three of those I think are really important pieces to that puzzle of exploration that I think when you are facing something like a VBAC that is such a huge shift from your prior birth experience, you have to be willing to do the work, as Dr. LaPera would say. But I love for families to take labor like a goddess and kind of map it over their last birth experience and see the different paths that they took and the different gates that they walked through, and how when you look at labor like a goddess and you go back to your prior birth experience, you can see where it falls in everything that they're describing. And then it allows you to look forward to your next birth and think about, how could this look if I follow this path?
And that's where the bravery is going to come in. I'm not going to
Exactly.
lie, that the things that are uncomfortable,
Yep.
it's where we walk through to expand and grow.
And it reminds me with our hypnobirthing families, when we're talking about fears, when we do our fear work with families in hypnobirthing, we challenge our families to ask the question, what if? What if that big fear, the number one bold letter big fear on your list happens? What if? Because most of the time, even families who take hypnobirthing have the programming of not wanting to go there, right? They'll write it down, but then beyond that, what are we doing with it? Yes, writing it down, get it out of your head, speak it out, get it out loud, but then what? And so then if we can look at our fears, if we can face them head on, and by using these tools, we can think, if this happens, what path would that take? If this happens, what path would that take? And it helps you cultivate backup plans. And it helps you like truly face your fears if you know how you would address it or handle it, or how your family and friends would address it and handle it if it were to come to fruition. That's how you ultimately face those fears. And that's, these books are part of that, giving you the tools to really look fear in the face and say, get behind me. I will utilize you to create a better experience, of ultimately a better life for myself. That I will utilize you to come up with backup plans. I will utilize you to create for myself and my baby the birth that I want to have. But you have to be willing to face it, to be brave, to stand up and say, and to read things that are hard to hear, and to look back at things that maybe you haven't thought about in a long time, because ultimately everything we've experienced to the point of becoming parents influences how we go through that journey, and then ultimately how we parent our children. So, obviously, like Kara said, we love it if people can do this work before they ever get pregnant the first time. But sometimes it takes going through those hard experiences to be like, oh shit, I have a lot of work to do because I do not want to go through that again. And where am I responsible for making my experience better?
We also get to turn the what if for what if it all works out?
Exactly.
What if it does go right? What if you're experiencing those sensations and you can cope with them? What if all your hormones are there? Like, there are ways to shift from what if dun 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 tragedy to what if fairy tales and flowers. Like, there are things that we can do to shift things. And how many episodes do I talk about therapy? Like every episode? I'm sorry, guys. It is another soapbox of mine. And probably because I've been through all types of therapy and I know how amazing it can be. I also know how expensive it can be when you're paying cash out of pocket. And one of the reasons, even in the Oh My God, I'm pregnant class, one of the top things in there is get your therapist. You're 2 months pregnant right now, get your therapist, because your therapist then has a time to get your baseline. And then if you need them in postpartum, they had your baseline at 2 months, right? It's going to help you in so many ways. But having a therapist right now might be the thing you need to really sort this shit out. You may have been resistant to it. You may think, how is that going to help? You won't know till you try. And honestly, the sooner you get into a therapist, the better your mental health is going to be throughout the process anyway, because you're going to have that backup support. They're also going to help you plan for the postpartum. You've now going to have 2 kids, right? Um, EMDR therapy, and I'll tell you how that worked. Eye movement desensitization. I can't even say it. Ashley's just so you say it.
Eye movement, desensitization, reprogramming.
See, there's so many syllables for me to say all that. But what it is basically, it's no drugs, no side effects other than good stuff. They do it in different ways, but it's a way of remapping your brain around a feeling, an emotion that you may feel about a certain event. So in my case, I had a little paddle in both hands and they had lights on the end of them. So as the right side would buzz, the left side would light up and I would look at the light. And then as the right side would buzz, the left side would light up, whatever. It would go back and forth. So I was buzzing on one side, light up on the other side. And I was using my eyes to go back and forth according to the light while the other one was buzzing. And what it does, let's go back to the emotion you felt when XYZ happened. I felt abandoned. Okay, so I want you to feel that emotion. And so you're feeling it in your body. And then I would hear the music in my ears, open my eyes, and start to go back and forth as I was feeling that abandonment from the process. And as you do it, it allows you to go back and revisit that event or that emotion without the activation. So it literally took the sting out of it so that I could recount the story from a distant perspective while still embodying the experience. And I know that doesn't really make sense until you actually do it, but I was able to process certain events in my life without the power, force, and activation or the triggering, people like to call it. I like the word activation better, so that I could put it in the place that it belongs in, remap what I want for my future, and then move on from that point. So, not discounting it, but also not having that feeling come up in my body all the time because your body holds the feelings, which is one of the reasons we're like, if you can get out of that same hospital, and that wasn't a good experience for you, get out of that same hospital, right? Because your body remembers, it remembers those feelings. So we work towards that when we do therapies like EMDR. And there are some families who need more help with medicine and stuff like that. But the EMDR is one of those therapies that really works well. And there are a lot of licensed therapists that do that therapy. So if you have that as an added criteria as you're sorting out your therapist, works amazing. And the other kind of therapy that I've had, which personally I think has worked the best for me, was somatic therapy. And not everybody practices it, but somatic therapy is a way of regulating your nervous system as you're talking about certain events, because that therapist is trained to see the waves of activation come up, allow you to sit with it instead of. So basically, what I would do is I would just stay in survival. I never dropped down to vulnerability. I never had a baseline. I just lived in survival because that's what I knew. I was efficient because I learned how to make emergency the best and I could just sail through it. I'm very skilled in that. However, my nervous system never got a break. And living at that high level all the time, exhausted all the time, not functioning the way I should be. And I didn't understand the balance of you only go into activation or fight or flight when you need to. But the rest of life can be really calm and peaceful and it can be a beautiful experience. Had no concept of that until the most amazing therapist really got in there and helped me understand what that felt like. And it took a while, but then it worked very fast and very efficiently. And now I have all these tools that as things come up, I can go, ooh, okay, allow what's that story? Where do I feel it in my body? How am I going to release that? And then what am I going to do going forward? And there's so many tips and techniques with that. I feel like the somatic therapy was a faster train to get where I wanted to go. It just wasn't available at the time when all the cognitive therapy was. And I think both of them are amazing. I think when you do a combination of those, it's phenomenal. At least that was my experience in them.
I love that. And yeah, that's another thing that you'll hear come up in pretty much every episode, every topic that we talk about is therapy, talking to people about your experiences. And again, it goes back to when we were talking about fear, right? Giving it a voice and letting it out so it doesn't sit in your body and keep you stuck and not moving forward. And another sort of way that you can approach this as well, and something that we highly recommend to people who are thinking about a VBAC, is through physical work that is also emotional and spiritual in a lot of ways for many people. And that is through some type of physical therapy, particularly for people who have had a surgical birth. Pelvic floor physical therapists or physical therapists who specialize in pregnancy and postpartum have so many skills, like the umbrella of their skills and what they can do for your body and then ultimately for your heart and your mind through that work is incredible. And I would love it if everybody could start physical therapy before they ever get pregnant or throughout their entire pregnancies. But particularly if you've gone through a pregnancy and you've had a surgical birth before, I highly recommend consulting with somebody who does pregnancy and postpartum physical therapy. And in particular, the biggest things that you'll benefit from is scar tissue remediation, where they are physically working on the scar tissue from your previous surgery to help with any pain, nerve entrapment, numbness. There can be a lot of physical symptoms from having a cesarean scar that nobody really talks about. And those physical symptoms affect us, not just physically, but like mentally and emotionally. Whenever we put our hand down on that lower part of our stomach and we get that twinge or it feels numb, it activates us. It activates that grief and that fear and that trepidation related to our birth experience and potentially our future birth experiences. And so having someone who can work on that physically while working with you on it emotionally can't even overstate how incredibly healing that can be, as well as helping reduce potential complications related to that your external scar and how it feels as you move through your pregnancy and then going through the birth experience, that scar on the outside. So they're not doing anything to the scar on your uterus. They're not going to impact your likelihood of complications that way or increase any risk of complications. They're working on the scar on the outside that you feel that is creating those feelings in your body. And then they also work on your pelvic floor and they can work on your vaginal area to help you get better control and better strength, better flexibility in your pelvic floor to help set you up for not only a more comfortable pregnancy, but likelihood of success in a vaginal birth, incontinence, and any other complications that can come from pregnancy. People love to act like if you have a C-section, you're not going to pee your pants in the future. That's not true. The incontinence and complications with our pelvic floor come from pregnancy, not necessarily the path your baby took out of your body. So just because you had a C-section does not mean that you would not benefit from pelvic floor therapy. If you have been pregnant, you could benefit from pelvic floor therapy. If you're going to get pregnant, you will benefit from pelvic floor therapy.
Go early. Like that's scar
Something that
tissue. And with scar tissue, like 2.5 months after you've had your baby is when you should start doing the scar tissue remediation, because once you're pregnant again, you can't do it. So that's something you need to jump on.
Yeah. And then the pelvic floor therapy and the vaginal work can not only help you heal from your prior pregnancy and help set you up for success with a vaginal birth from the flexibility and the strength of your pelvic floor, but getting you in touch with your vaginal strength and how you're connected to that part of your body when you've never had a vaginal birth before can be so empowering to really get in touch with how your pelvic floor works, how it impacts how your baby moves through your body, getting you in touch mentally and emotionally with what's happening down there so that you are not afraid of it. So it doesn't feel foreign to you, can just be hugely beneficial. And like I said, it's physical therapy, but the emotional release and the fear release and the empowerment that I have seen people walk away from this pelvic floor physical therapy with is it really can't be overstated. It's so much more than someone physically working on your body. They are connecting you with your body. And that's exactly what you need, especially for a VBAC, to be connected with the part of your body that you weren't able to use before because your baby was plucked from your stomach instead of coming out of the vagina can be daunting. And so getting you in touch with that part of your body that you weren't able to utilize before to help you really feel connected with it is going to make you feel so empowered going into having a vaginal birth the second time around or the third time around. Other physical work that can be done to help prepare your body and connect you with your body is through spinning babies practitioners. You'll hear in many episodes us refer to spinning babies, which is not the act of spinning a baby, but rather working with your body in its pregnant state to help your baby have the best positioning for labor. But they also do things called body balancing and fascia release, where they are actually getting everything aligned and they are stretching and softening and working with your ligaments and your fascia in your body to help give you the most flexibility, to help give you the most optimal position for your baby to be born in by working your body rather than trying to move a baby. We are moving your body around your baby to help set you up for success in that way. But again, this is physical work that ends up being incredibly spiritual and emotional for people that go through it, because it's really that act of connecting with another person physically that is then connecting you with your body and your baby. And so, for sure, explore your pelvic floor physical therapy options, your scar work options, and your spinning babies and body balancing options in your area, or as close as you can get to your area. This is work that I think everybody deserves in their pregnancy, is this kind of incredibly healing body work.
I have found that if you have a religious practice or you have a spiritual practice, however you call it, have you explored that to help get you through your birth? Have you explored that to help you with forgiveness? Have you explored that to help you with your fears? Because a lot of times I've had, either whether it's a certain religion or a spiritual path, they believe in a savior or a Buddha or Allah or whoever they are leaning on to help them get through the day. I hear constant prayers that they're going to church, whatever. But when it comes to this big experience, they're not utilizing who they believe in and what they believe in. What if you explore that so that you can work through that journey with your higher being, with your higher self, with whatever you hold spiritually significant in your mind and heart? Because that is a connection that can get you through things. We have a birth story that's going to be coming up that talks a lot about that with her fourth baby. And I'm excited for you to hear that. But utilize that as a tool if that can get you through the process. And I've had some where it's just a deep spiritual connection with their baby. They know they have chosen each other. They know they are meant to be together. I've had some where it is Jesus is going to get me through it. We have praise music and we are physically calling out to Jesus throughout the process and praying to get us through an experience that's difficult, that has struggle in it, but also has moments of peace and beauty that they can recognize when they're utilizing their higher self. So that can be part of your journey. And if you have those beliefs, I would encourage those to be part of your journey and for you also to explore that side.
And I think ultimately, where you need to connect the most outside of yourself is your baby. And all of this, everything we've been talking about today, is a tool that can help you connect with your baby, but not just the baby that you were pregnant with, but the baby that you had already and your prior birth experience. Because there can be, not just for VBAC, but when we had either a difficult birth the first time around, or we had a medicated birth the first time around, or we had an induction the first time around, guilt that we carry around as parents about why we allowed that type of birth to happen for our first baby, allowed our first baby to go through that. And now we want something different. We want something quote unquote better this next time around. And Kara and I believe that ultimately the roads that we go down lead us to where we're supposed to be, right? And there's a time and a place for the information that comes to us and for the knowledge that we gain. And going back to what I said in the beginning about forgiving yourself for what you didn't know before you knew it. But it can really benefit you to talk to your kid. And if you listen to my birth story, you know that I have talked to my kids about their birth experiences. And that was incredibly healing for me to spend time with my children when they were small, hearing what they remembered from their birth experience that was so traumatic for me that I could see ultimately that they came out the other side of it okay, relatively unscathed, with positive and negative feelings about what they experienced. And if your child is still small, I definitely encourage you to see what memories they have access to about their birth experience, because they may not see it the same way that you do. They may not have the same hard feelings about that birth experience. They may understand completely, hey, the reason I came out the sunroof is because of a choice I made to get tangled in my cord or to try to come out feet first or whatever it is. And remember that this child that you already had and the child that you are currently pregnant with, they chose you. You're their parent for a reason. They trust you, right? And talking to your child about their birth experience can be incredibly healing, not just if they don't have the same hard feelings, but if they do, to be able to look at each other and say, that was rough. And here we are on the other side of it, and we came through it together. And I'm so grateful for you. I'm so grateful we have each other. I'm so grateful we're both here safe. And it allows you to process those feelings and to forgive yourself for not knowing what you didn't know and to let go of whatever damage you feel like you may have done to your child and allow yourself to move forward now with the knowledge that you can make different choices and to try to create a different experience for this next child, not because you love them more or because you want better for them, because now you're capable, because now you have the information. Don't hold yourself back from potentially having a better, safer experience because you think some reason you need to have the same difficult experience so that your children don't resent each other. I feel like I hear some version of this often from my VBAC families where they're worried about resentment between the children because of the two birth experiences being different.
I hear that with circumcision. We did it on the first, we can't do it on the second, right? We beat ourselves up
Yeah.
for everything.
For everything. This is literally parent guilt 101. And it all goes back to anxiety, right? This idea that like with anxiety that we can control future outcomes or we could change the past, which is the ultimate lesson is that anxiety is a liar and it gives you this false idea that you can go back and change things that have already unfolded or that you can control everything that's going to happen in the future and that's just not true. And parenting is all about continuously trying to do better. And you're going to have many opportunities over that first baby's life to show up for them and to be there for them. And you were there for them through that whole difficult birth process. And you are connected through that experience. And this pregnancy, this birth is not their journey. This child is not them. And it's okay for them to have different experiences from each other. Um, but connect with your kid, see where they're at, take their temperature in regards to what they remember about their birth and pregnancy experience. They might surprise you. Mine definitely surprised me.
And if they're still really little, you can talk through that experience with them while they're asleep. You can be whispering your feelings and what happened and things like that while they're in an open state of sleep, so that you're not having to interact. But remember, they experienced that birth with you too. So you're not telling them anything they don't know. You're just giving them your perspective on what they experienced. And with this next baby, sometimes you need to sort out, which is why I created the journal Conversations with Your Baby. It's on Amazon. We have a link on our website. Conversations with Your Baby to talk and explore who you were before this pregnancy. And for first-time moms, it's who I was, what created me as a human, and where am I heading with this baby and this birth, right? And it's giving you the tools, they're prompts in the journal that you can write from your experience that help your baby understand who you are, why you're making these choices, and what those tools are that you're going to be bringing into labor and birth and parenting with them. So it's a really good way to kind of sort out your feelings and explore where you're headed, where you've healed, and where you're hoping that you can go with them. The most important piece of all of this is that you can do it. There's work to be done, but you can do it. And once you get okay with any outcome, you've already arrived at your destination. I don't want you to hold back because what if it doesn't happen? And so you just go, it's not worth it. It might not be to you at that time. But if you want that more than anything, then I say go for it and be okay with whatever outcome. Isn't it better to have put all of your balls in that basket, being okay with either basket because you've done the work And then you move forward and say, and it just didn't work out, but I did everything I could do. Because sometimes there's something physical. You can't do it. What you were meant to do is the emotional, spiritual, and processing work to make you a bigger, more expansive human, which will make you a bigger, more expansive parent with more empathy, more compassion, more understanding. And that's why we're all here. That's what we're supposed to be working through. It's not always easy, but we know you can do it, and we're here to support you when you do it. Find those people around you that can build you up, that can support what you want, and understand how deeply important it is to you. And I hope you find that path. And we'll see everybody next week.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us today. And remember, it's your body, your choice, and finding your voice is your power. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us in all the places, and go to birtheducationcenter.com for our blog and more online education classes. And we'll see you next week.